Tonight, trace the steps of Roman Seleznev, the ghost of Vladivostok, a cyber kingpin who ran an untouchable digital crime empire until a holiday getaway led him directly into the waiting hands of the US Secret Service. The siren song of stolen data. The birth of the digital bazaar. It was in the hidden corners of the World Wide Web, far beneath the search bar and the comforting surface of everyday browsing. A space that felt less like a network and more like a vast, unindexed ocean floor, that the cyber bazaars began to rise. Imagine, if you will, the deep, low thrum of a server rack, a sound that is the very quiet rhythm of commerce in the digital age. Now, layers that sound with a sprawling, dimly lit atmosphere of an ancient, illicit market. This market was not of spice or silk. Where the air hangs thick with fragrance, it was a market of purely stolen information, where the air was cold, thin, and entirely anonymous. These were the carding forums, and in the crucial year of 2007, they represented not just a criminal economy, but the absolute lawless frontier of a new global commerce. Among the most notorious of these digital dens were Carter's Market and Carter Planet, names whispered in the encrypted darkness of private, secure messaging channels. They were less like glossy online retailers with easy interfaces and trust signals. They were more like hidden, unindexed caverns, digital speakeasies built on the fundamental paradox that anonymity was the highest currency, and yet trust was the most lethal trap. Here, every interaction was a negotiation, and every new username a potential police officer. The commodity, the digital soul. In these burgeoning bazaars, the commodity for sale was not physical, but purely informational, the credit card dump. This was the ultimate distilled essence of a cardholder's financial life. A dump, in this parlance, was the raw data stolen from the magnetic stripe of a credit or debit card. It wasn't a photograph or a scanned image. It was a file, a cold sequence of numbers and symbols containing the cardholder's name, the full account number, the expiration date, and critically, the card verification value, or CVV code. This information, collectively known as Track 1 and Track 2 data, was quite literally the digital soul of the card. It was the raw blueprint, ready to be imprinted onto any blank piece of plastic, a process known as encoding, creating a counterfeit that was virtually indistinguishable from the original to a point-of-sale system. A successful dump was not simply a small $20 online purchase. It was the entire access key to a bank account, a complete tool for wholesale identity theft. The economy, a sophisticated supply chain. The economy of these carding forums was sophisticated, terrifyingly efficient, and had a brutal logic all its own. Sellers, known as vendors, posted meticulous lists of their wares. These lists were often categorized with a chilling precision. The country of issue, United States, Canada, United Kingdom. The card type, Visa, MasterCard, American Express. The guarantee of the balance. Vendors would often guarantee a minimum available limit. The freshness date. Sometimes they would even specify the exact date the data was freshly dumped from a compromised point-of-sale system, knowing that freshness equated to a lower risk of the card being cancelled. Buyers, often referred to as cashers, browse these lists like stock market brokers, placing wholesale orders for thousands of dumps at a time. This was far removed from petty, opportunistic theft. It was the construction of a wholesale, global supply chain for financial fraud, a machine that could be spun up and monetized in hours. The price of a single credit card dump varied wildly, dictated by the brutal calculus of supply, demand, and the perceived quality. A run-of-the-mill Visa or MasterCard from a domestic United States bank might fetch a modest $10 to $30. However, the truly coveted items, premium cards such as American Express Centurion or high-limit cards from affluent regions, could command hundreds of dollars, sometimes over 1,000, reflecting the anticipated high spending limit the criminal could exploit. The true value, however, lay in the volume. A single, successful vendor selling 50,000 dumps in a week could easily net hundreds of thousands of dollars in profit, operating entirely outside the reach of conventional law enforcement. The currency, Liberty Reserve. But how did this ghost money change hands? This illegal, high-volume trade required a financial system built on the very anonymity that the criminal markets thrived on. Conventional banking, even digital wallets like PayPal, was absolutely out of the question, as transactions could be traced, accounts frozen, and identities inevitably revealed. The answer arrived in the form of a name that would become synonymous with the shadow economy: Liberty Reserve. Liberty Reserve was the perfect ghost money of the shadow markets. It was a digital currency provider based in Costa Rica, established with the explicit design of operating entirely outside of government regulation and central bank oversight. The process was simple and, most critically, intentionally opaque. A carder would deposit real currency into a Liberty Reserve account through a decentralized network of exchanges, often shadowy, unregistered money transfer businesses. That currency would instantly be converted into Liberty Reserve dollars or euros. Once the funds were in Liberty Reserve, they became nearly untraceable. To pay for 1,000 stolen credit card dumps, a buyer would simply transfer Liberty Reserve funds to the vendor's account number, often a simple 9-digit numerical string. No names, no bank records, no paper trail. It was a beautiful, seamless mechanism for criminal commerce. Liberty Reserve became the de facto central bank of the cyber underworld, facilitating countless millions, if not billions, of dollars in illegal trade, powering the engine of identity theft and financial fraud across the globe. The paradox of trust. The trusted vendor. The inherent structure of this economy created a high-risk, high-reward environment. For the buyer, the risk was constantly being sold dead dumps, card information that had already been cancelled or whose transaction had been declined. A vendor who cheated their customer once could instantly destroy their own reputation, which was the entire foundation of their business. This led to the creation of a crucial internal system of accountability, the absolute need for trusted vendors. On the carding forums, a new seller was instantly treated with profound suspicion. They were required to start with small, monitored sales, often under the direct scrutiny of the forum administrators. Over time, through successful, dispute-free transactions, they would earn the coveted Trusted Vendor Badge, a small, powerful graphic next to their username that was worth its weight in Liberty Reserve. This badge was a guarantee of quality, a promise that their dumps were live and ready to be exploited. Buyers flocked to these trusted vendors, knowing that their investment, a $10 dump, would yield hundreds or thousands in fraudulent purchases. The high-risk nature extended to the vendors themselves. Every successful swipe of a counterfeit card, every wire transfer of stolen funds, increased the vendor's exposure. Yet, for the young, technically adept entrepreneurs of the digital black market, the initial allure of easy digital wealth was intoxicating. The barriers to entry were low: a basic knowledge of computer security, some malware, and the sheer audacity to steal on a global scale. The potential payout was transformative: the chance to escape the quiet confines of a life in a country with limited economic opportunity and buy luxury goods, travel, and live a life unconstrained by legitimate work. This initial period, the era of Carter's Market and Liberty Reserve, was the wild, formative youth of the cyber kingpins. It was a time when the rules were being written by the criminals themselves, a brief window of nearly perfect impunity before law enforcement began to truly grasp the scale and sophistication of the threat. The digital gold rush was on, and the quiet, rhythmic hum of the early internet masked the dizzying clatter of transactions totaling millions. But in any market built on secrecy, there is always one shadow that falls longer than the rest. The shadow of the unseen player, the silent operator who controls the best product and commands the highest prices. As the volume of stolen data swelled, one figure would soon emerge from the cacophony of vendors, one who moved with an unnerving confidence, an almost professional menace, hinting that he knew something the others did not. The digital whispers were coalescing, and soon a single, powerful voice would rise above the siren song of stolen data. The phantom vendor, NC Yucks, extended. While the carding forums hummed with the noise of illicit commerce, a quiet, watchful presence began to stir. The United States Secret Service, best known for protecting the president, carries a secondary and equally critical mandate: the investigation of financial crimes, specifically counterfeiting and bank fraud. Their entry into the digital markets was not with the blare of sirens, but like a detective slipping into a dark alley, observing the shadows. It was a tedious, mind-numbing process of immersion into a world of acronyms and jargon, of card dumps, track 1, track 2 data, and the casual exchange of stolen livelihoods. The agents of the Secret Service began their surveillance deep within the forums, establishing nondescript profiles and slowly, patiently mapping the criminal ecosystem. They were looking for patterns, for the biggest distributors, and for the vendors whose operations betrayed a level of organizational sophistication that moved beyond petty theft and into the realm of organized crime. They nicknamed this phase "sifting the sand," a reference to the endless deluge of digital noise they had to process to find the few grains of real intelligence. Amidst the chaos of thousands of daily transactions and the endless chatter of criminal boasts, one vendor's profile began to stand out with an unsettling clarity. His name in the forums was NCUX. The username was short, cryptic, and quickly became synonymous with both quality and overwhelming volume. The quality was measured in the freshness of the stolen data and the high success rate of its subsequent fraudulent use. The volume was measured in the sheer destructive capacity of his inventory. Some users began to call him Psycho, not because of any public outburst, but because his operation was so relentless, so professional, and so utterly devoid of caution that it seemed unhinged. While other vendors dabbled, selling hundreds of car dumps at a time, Encux treated the shadow market as a legitimate, scalable business. He was the chief executive of Stolen Data, running an operation with the efficiency of a Fortune 500 company, but dedicated entirely to wholesale theft. His sales pitches were bold, almost defiant, often appearing at the very top of the forum listings, like a permanent, immovable advertisement. He offered the highest quality stolen data at the lowest wholesale prices. The disparity in his pricing model was instantly striking to investigators like Special Agent David Miller, who specialized in financial market manipulation. While common Visa and MasterCard dumps sold for $10 to $30 from smaller vendors, a typical margin reflecting the risk, Encux often advertised premium, high-limit American Express data for as low as $1, provided the buyer committed to a minimum order of 1,000. More common Visa dumps sold for a flat $5. His logic was simple, terrifying, and brilliant in its own perverse way. He didn't care about the margins on individual dumps. He cared about massive turnover and establishing an absolute market dominance. He was intentionally flooding the market with stolen identity, undercutting the competition, and making an absolute fortune through volume alone. This strategy crippled his competitors and made him the indispensable source for anyone looking to enter the carding game. The sheer, unprecedented scale of Encux's operation demanded the Secret Service's immediate and unyielding focus. He was not just distributing stolen data. He was actively driving the global price down and normalizing the massive exploitation of consumer credit, effectively expanding the entire criminal economy. Agent Miller and his team began the arduous work of building a comprehensive digital profile, a process that required the painstaking review of every message, every transaction log, every boast, and every cryptic note Encux had ever made on the public and private areas of the forums. They spent months correlating timestamps with global clocks, creating a digital circadian rhythm for the vendor. The investigation took them backward in time, tracing the digital breadcrumbs of Encux's earlier, less polished work, suggesting a progression from small-time fraudster to a master operator. They noted a significant inflection point in late 2007, where the quality of his inventory suddenly spiked and his operational security tightened dramatically. This timeline was crucial, painting a picture not of a sudden criminal genesis, but of a devoted student of cybercrime who had perfected his trade over years, likely exploiting massive data breaches that others hadn't even discovered yet. The trail, however, constantly looped back to one physical location, a common anchor point in the digital tide. Through sophisticated technical analysis of Internet Protocol, IP, addresses, the numerical location of a computer on the network, and fragmented transaction data from various web money accounts, the preferred semi-anonymous method of payment on the dark markets, the agents began to converge on a single distant point on the map: Vladivostok, Russia. The investigation narrowed the identity behind Encux to a young man named Roman Seleznev. The evidence was circumstantial but mounting to the point of certainty. The consistency of the time zones of his posts that aligned perfectly with Vladivostok time. The occasional telltale Russian language used in private messages when communicating with certain buyers, and the undeniable, repeated connection between the web money accounts used by NCUX for receiving bulk payments and bank accounts clearly associated with the name Roman Seleznev. Vladivostok, a major port city on the Pacific near the borders of China and North Korea, became the immovable center of the Secret Service's focus. He was operating in plain sight, protected by geography. In 2009, the Secret Service, having established a solid theoretical link between Nux and Roman Seleznev, decided they could no longer rely on surveillance alone. They needed an arrest. They decided to reach out to their international counterparts. They contacted the Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation, FSB, the principal successor agency to the KGB. The request was formal and direct. The Secret Service shared the intelligence, the voluminous evidence detailing hundreds of millions of dollars in global losses, and the precise physical location of the cybercriminal who was causing catastrophic damage to financial institutions around the world. The meeting with the FSB was conducted with the quiet, rigid formality that governs international law enforcement cooperation. A sterile, tension-filled conference room where every phrase was carefully weighted. The Secret Service provided their meticulously organized files, their complex technical analysis, and their clear request for assistance in apprehending Roman Seleznev. Agent Miller recalled the steely, impassive faces of his Russian counterparts, the quiet deliberation after they reviewed the evidence. The response from the FSB was polite, professional, and ultimately profoundly unhelpful. The Russian agency acknowledged the seriousness of the crime, nodding at the figures, but made it clear that their priorities lay elsewhere. They expressed little to no interest in prosecuting a Russian national for financial crimes committed primarily against American and European financial interests. There was an unspoken political calculus at play. The agents left the meeting with a sinking, bitter feeling, knowing that while they had identified and located their primary target, they had reached a political and jurisdictional dead end. Without the direct, active cooperation of the Russian government, Roman Seleznev was effectively untouchable, protected by distance and the non-extradition treaty between the two countries. The digital kingpin was safe in Vladivostok, free to continue his global enterprise. The silence of the phantom. The Secret Service agents returned home, the stale, recycled air of the diplomatic meeting room still clinging to their suits like a cheap cologne. They were resigned to the fact that their hands were tied. For now, the FSB had offered nothing but blank stares and bureaucratic stone walls. Shifting their focus, the American team was forced back to damage control, meticulously tracking the thousands of NCUX's unwitting and knowing customers, prioritizing the mitigation of the financial ruin he wrought, instead of pursuing the elusive source itself. A heavy, frustrating 2 weeks passed. The investigative team, seasoned veterans of financial crime, felt the familiar, demoralizing weight of a case gone cold due to international politics. They were poring over spreadsheets, mapping payment flows, and coordinating with banks, the unglamorous, grinded-out work of a Secret Service fraud detail. Then, an event so utterly, brazenly suspicious occurred that it snapped the entire team back to rigid attention. On a Tuesday morning, Detective Agent Sarah Kincaid, the team's lead analyst, walked into the war room. She didn't speak. She simply placed a printout on the main table. It was a screenshot of a high-volume, continuously updated sales thread on a notorious carding forum, a thread that had been the cornerstone of Nux's empire for years. Below the last successful transaction, dated precisely 3 days prior, was a chilling, empty void. No new posts, no bump from an automated bot, no customer complaints or sales confirmations, nothing. Shortly after the unhelpful closed-door meeting with the FSB, a period of barely a fortnight, the vendor Ncux, the relentless psycho who had dominated the carding markets for years, suddenly and completely vanished. It was not a slow fade. It was an instantaneous, absolute cessation of activity. Kincaid pulled up a second monitor. "I checked every known alias and every mirror site," she said, her voice taut, betraying the seismic shift in her gut feeling. His high-volume sales threads are cold. His private message inbox, untouched. No login activity. His username has gone completely dark across every known forum he has ever frequented and every encrypted chat channel we monitor. It's like a massive power grid being instantly shut off. The disappearance was absolute and immediate, raising a cacophony of red flags for the investigators. A silence like this was louder than any activity. The collective wisdom of the Secret Service team screamed the same conclusion. This was far too coincidental to be random. A kingpin doesn't just retire from a multi-million-dollar business and walk away without a word, without a farewell post, without a succession plan, and certainly not at the height of his profitability. This was the act of a man whose life had suddenly, violently, become complicated. For Agent Michael Vance, the lead investigator, the blood ran cold. He slammed his fist on the table. "A leak! It has to be a leak. This isn't a burnout. It's a bolt hole." To the Secret Service, there was only one conclusion. One chilling breach of security that explained the sudden, terrifying silence. Roman Seleznev had been tipped off. The quiet, closed-door meeting with the FSB, a supposedly confidential intelligence exchange between allied nations, had somehow been compromised. The meticulous case file, the identity they had so painstakingly confirmed, the fact that they knew he was Ncux, all of it had been handed to him on a silver platter. Their primary target knew with absolute certainty that he had been identified and was being watched by the US government. The digital kingpin had been alerted, not by a mistake in his own operational security, which had been flawless for years, but by a catastrophic leak from a supposed trusted government partner. The realization settled over the war room like a toxic cloud. They had been right all along, but their success had been poisoned by betrayal. The silence of Nux was the sound of a closing window, the shattering of the last best chance they had to catch him on his digital turf. The loss of Ncux's commanding presence on the forums was a crippling setback, a void in the criminal hierarchy that would momentarily sow chaos. But it also inadvertently confirmed a chilling theory. They had been entirely correct about his identity, and he had been forced to take immediate, evasive action. Roman Seleznev was real. He was Ncux, and now he was running. Crucially, the market he had created did not close. The criminal infrastructure, the thousands of customers, the automated shops, the encrypted transaction systems, and the constant, overwhelming flow of stolen credit card data continued to operate, running on the terrible momentum he had built. He was the architect, but the house stood without him, for now. The question for the investigators was no longer how to find Cux's identity, but rather when and where he would reappear. They knew full well that a powerful kingpin does not simply retire from a vast, multi-million-dollar kingdom built on the theft of millions of lives. He was out there, reorganizing his operation, establishing new, more secure channels, and waiting for the initial heat, the inevitable global chatter sparked by his absence, to die down. "He'll come back," Vance stated, his voice low and resolute as he looked around the room. "He has an infrastructure to feed and an ego to satisfy. He's going ghost, not going clean. We just transitioned from an intelligence operation to a fugitive recovery case." The hunt had just become a patient, global stakeout, moving from the anonymous ether of the dark web to the tangible, high-stakes game of international law enforcement. They had the name, Roman Seleznev. Now, they just needed the man. The serpent sheds its skin. The quiet, chilling moment arrived in April 2010, not with a dramatic digital explosion, but with a sudden, silent void. The servers hosting cardingworld.cc, often referenced interchangeably with Carter's Market, one of the digital bazaars Roman Seleznev had once called home, were abruptly seized by international law enforcement. It was like the lights being abruptly switched off in a secret market, leaving the patrons stumbling in the sudden darkness, unsure of what had been taken and who was left exposed. The server seizure, while a major disruption to the criminal underground, was a quiet victory for the investigators. The true prize was not the hardware itself, but the data it held, the entire archive of forum posts, private messages, transaction logs, and administrative backups. A complete digital snapshot of the kingdom Roman had helped to rule. This massive data dump became the raw, vital evidence the Secret Service needed to confirm their suspicions and to track the serpent who had vanished into the digital grass. The first clue, recovered from the seized servers, was immediately incriminating. Deep within the administrative logs, the investigators found the details associated with the vendor NCUX. Among the encrypted and obfuscated data, they managed to extract a crucial piece of personal information, NCUX's email address and new incriminating evidence. This single email address linked to the NCUX profile was now a powerful, undeniable connection to the real world, a thread that could finally be pulled. The discovery served as a definitive confirmation that their initial investigation had been correct. The digital trail of NCUX led directly to a series of physical and online personas associated with Roman Seleznev. However, Nux himself had been silent for months, ever since the unhelpful meeting with the Federal Security Service. The investigators knew Roman had been tipped off, and they expected him to be lying low. What they didn't expect was the bold, immediate way he re-entered the game. The digital quietness of the server seizure was soon broken by a highly suspicious, simultaneous appearance. Almost immediately after the cardingworld.cc seizure, a new vendor emerged on a competing forum, carder.su. This vendor's username was Track2. The appearance of Track2 was instantly troubling to law enforcement for several key reasons. First was the name itself. Track 2 is the technical term for the specific data stream on a credit card's magnetic stripe that contains the most sensitive information: the account number, the expiration date, and the crucial CVV code. It was a brazen, professional moniker that signaled immediate intent. It was as if a bank robber had named himself Safecracker. Second, and more significantly, was Track 2's instant, unearned status. In the strictly hierarchical world of carding forums, where trust was everything and a new vendor was treated as a potential scammer, Track 2 arrived with an unprecedented level of privilege. He was immediately given trusted vendor status by the forum administrators. This designation, which usually took months or even a year of successful monitored sales to acquire, was simply handed to him. The instant trust Track 2 commanded strongly hinted at a hidden connection and an insider deal, a collaboration between the forum's inner circle and the new vendor. Third, the appearance of Track 2 coincided with a sudden and aggressive culling of the competition. Within days of Track 2's arrival, several other well-established vendors on carder.su were suddenly and unceremoniously banned or had their accounts locked, often without explanation. It was a digital clearing of the decks, removing established market players to make room for the new king. To the investigators, the pattern was clear, chilling, and undeniable. NCUX had not retired. He had merely undergone a coordinated rebranding. Roman Seleznev, tipped off by an unknown source, had shed the NCUX identity, knowing it was compromised, and had smoothly transitioned to the new, protected alias Track 2. He had moved his entire operation to a new digital location, carder.su, ensuring he maintained his market dominance. The name change was a security measure. The change in forum was a business decision. The volume and quality of the card dumps offered by Track 2 were identical to those NCUX had sold, hinting at a coordinated rebranding. The evidence from the seized Carding World servers was now used to connect the dots between the old and the new. The NCUX email address was cross-referenced with the new Track 2 activity. While the new account was more heavily protected, the investigators began to find subtle overlaps in the language, the sales patterns, and the technical infrastructure that conclusively linked the two personas. They were dealing with the same individual, but one who was now far more cautious and operating with a newfound sense of impunity, believing his tip-off had protected him. This moment marked a key escalation in the cat and mouse game. Roman Seleznev was demonstrating that he was not merely an opportunistic thief, but a sophisticated, organized criminal capable of adapting his entire operation overnight. He had taken his millions in stolen funds, purchased new identities, secured an inside position on a new forum, and continued his criminal enterprise without missing a beat. The investigators, however, now held the advantage of time and patience. They had documented the transition, and they had the incriminating NCUX email address. The new identity, Track 2, might be protected by the forum administrators, but the core business of stealing and selling data remained the same. Law enforcement knew they could not capture the serpent while he was safe in Russia, but they could now begin to painstakingly track his new trail of digital breadcrumbs, waiting for the moment he would inevitably slip up. The disappearance of the old king and the instant coronation of the new were not two separate events, but a single, calculated move. Roman Seleznev, the ghost of Vladivostok, was back in business, more aggressive and more confident than ever. The serpent had shed its skin, and the Secret Service now watched the new form with quiet focus, ready to follow the faint, glowing trail of stolen data wherever it led them next. The game of digital hide-and-seek was now truly on. The Delhi and the digital ghost, far from the encrypted chaos of Vladivostok and the shadow markets of the World Wide Web, the investigation took a quiet, unexpected turn toward the mundane. Our journey now leads us to the seemingly ordinary American West, to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and to the everyday aroma of freshly baked bread. This is the sensory landscape of Schlotsky's Delhi, a place where the theft of millions of dollars would begin with the simplest of purchases. Imagine the ordinary scene, the clatter of registers, the friendly hum of conversation, the swipe of a credit card across the point of sale system. It was here, in the midst of this everyday American life, that Detective Dunn began a forensic investigation that would eventually unravel one of the largest cybercrime operations in history. The discovery was quiet, chilling, and profound. A tiny, insidious digital ghost had been living inside the Delhi's cash registers. Detective Dunn, a local law enforcement officer with a keen understanding of computer forensics, was brought in to investigate reports of an unusual number of fraudulent credit card charges traced back to the Coeur d'Alene area. What he found inside Schlotsky's system was a piece of malicious software that went by the name Cameo malware. It was not a virus designed to destroy or deface. It was a silent, patient thief, a digital eavesdropper that operated entirely in the background. The nature of the malware was both simple and deeply disturbing in its effectiveness. When a customer swiped their card, the data passed through the Delhi's computer system before reaching the legitimate processing network. Cameo was installed right at this critical junction, a man-in-the-middle attack happening inside the cash register itself. The malware was listening for keystrokes and card swipes, waiting for the magnetic stripe data, the track 1 and track 2 information, as it was read by the point-of-sale device. It was essentially performing a massive, invisible, and industrial-scale digital skimming operation. Every time a card was swiped, Cameo captured all the raw, unencrypted information: the account number, the expiration date, the cardholder's name, and the crucial CVV code. This stolen data was then silently compiled into a large, clear text file on the Delhi's internal computer. But the work of the malware did not stop there. The files full of stolen credit card dumps had to be transmitted to the cybercriminal. Detective Dunn's forensic analysis revealed that the Cameo malware was programmed to establish a connection to an external server. The destination of this transmitted data was logged, and the address pointed clearly and consistently to a Russian server. This single digital breadcrumb, the Russian Internet Protocol address, was the first tangible link between small-town fraud and the global operations of the elusive phantom vendor, Track 2. The method of installation was equally revealing, implying a level of carelessness, or perhaps brazenness, on the part of the hackers. The forensic team discovered that the point-of-sale system, which was supposed to be dedicated solely to card processing, had been compromised through a common security flaw. An employee, or possibly the perpetrator via remote access, had simply compromised the machine, often by browsing to a malicious website. This website designed to exploit vulnerabilities in outdated or poorly configured browsers, had then executed a script, silently installing the Cameo malware onto the point-of-sale terminal, implying insider or remote access. The implication of this installation method was critical. The cybercriminal was not a highly sophisticated code-breaking genius relying on zero-day exploits. Rather, he was a pragmatic, methodical opportunist exploiting unsophisticated vulnerabilities. He was casting a wide net, looking for businesses with lax security, exposed computer systems, and employees who might carelessly surf the web on a dedicated cash register. Detective Dunn's work in the Coeur d'Alene Deli proved that the fraud was not random. It was the result of a coordinated, remote campaign of intrusion. The stolen data was flowing directly from this small-town American business to a server in Russia, where it would be packaged and sold on the dark web markets that Roman Seleznev, alias Nkux, and now Track 2, controlled. The sensory detail of the deli, the smell of bread, the clatter of the register, stood in stark contrast to the cold efficiency of the digital crime being committed. The investigation now moved into a phase of tedious but essential data analysis. Dunn and his colleagues began to cross-reference the timing of the fraudulent charges reported by banks with the dates the Cameo malware was active in the deli. This meticulous work established a direct, undeniable chain of evidence. The cards compromised at Schlotsky's deli were the very cards being sold and cashed out almost instantly in the digital underworld. The discovery of the Russian Internet Protocol address was the first glimmer of light on the international trail. It gave the investigators a tangible point of focus, something to tie the physical crime, the loss of money from a customer's bank account, to the abstract realm of cyber fraud. It was the first physical trace of the phantom vendor, the link to the stolen feast. The pursuit of the cyber kingpin was an investigation of seemingly disconnected worlds: the quiet deli in Idaho, the dark forums of Russia, and now the mundane confines of a police station in Ohio. Our story shifts to a seemingly unconnected arrest in Ohio for using stolen cards, an event that, on its own, meant little, but which would prove to be the critical link in the entire global investigation. It was the moment the physical trail of stolen funds finally intersected with the digital fingerprint of the phantom vendor. The arrest involved an individual caught using a handful of stolen credit cards to purchase goods, a common occurrence in the United States. In the digital age, however, the process of investigating such a crime extends far beyond the stolen plastic itself. When the suspect's computer was seized and forensically examined, it yielded a treasure trove of evidence, a list of thousands of credit card dumps stored on the arrested person's PC, cards the suspect had purchased from the shadow markets and was actively trying to exploit. The police in Ohio contacted the Secret Service, who immediately began tracing the origins of the stolen cards found on the arrested person's PC. This reverse engineering process is the essence of financial crime investigation. You don't chase the crime forward, you follow the stolen goods backward to the source. The crucial step was to identify the common purchase points for the cards. Where had the original, legitimate cards been compromised? The results of this analysis were striking. A significant cluster of the cards found on the suspect's computer shared a single, highly specific point of compromise. The data was clear and consistent. A large number of these cards had recently been used at the Schlotzsky's deli in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. This discovery was the professional equivalent of a seismic shift. The random arrest in Ohio had just provided ironclad confirmation of Detective Dunn's quiet forensic work in Idaho, creating the crucial connection, the common purchase point of the deli. The local case, the Cameo malware, the Russian Internet Protocol address, was not an isolated incident. It was part of a larger, established criminal supply chain. The cards stolen by the Cameo malware in Idaho were being instantly packaged, sold, and then used by cashers like the arrested person in Ohio. The deli had been the digital faucet from which the data flowed. The Secret Service now had a direct, irrefutable link connecting the physical world of financial fraud to the digital world of the carding markets. The question quickly moved from where the cards were stolen to where they were sold. Tracing the cards found on the PC led the investigators back to the two new carding websites, bulba.cc and track2.name, emphasizing their identical look. The connection between the two sites was immediately evident. They possessed an almost identical visual design and technical infrastructure, suggesting they were run by the same individual or group. The sites were clearly linked, operating in parallel to service the stolen data market. Track2.name was the public-facing site, the market where the majority of vendors and buyers could transact. It was an open bazaar, specializing in the bulk sale of stolen card dumps. Bulba.cc bulba, being Russian slang for potato, often used as a playful term for a Belarusian or Eastern European individual, was the more exclusive, elite market. The names of these two sites were the ultimate confirmation. The vendor who had taken over the carding world, who had been given instant trusted status on carder.su after NCUX vanished, was named Track2. The two websites, track2.name and bulba.cc, were his online storefronts, his digital real estate, emphasizing their identical look and connection to the suspicious Track2 vendor. The data stolen via the Cameo malware from Schlotzsky's deli was being directly funneled to these two sites, where it was being listed, sold, and paid for using Liberty Reserve. The sophisticated, systematic nature of the operation was now fully revealed. Roman Seleznev, alias NCUX, alias Track2, had established a self-sustaining financial ecosystem. Acquisition. He deployed the Cameo malware into vulnerable American businesses like Schlotzsky's deli. Aggregation. The stolen data was compiled and sent to his Russian server. Distribution. The raw dumps were then uploaded to his branded websites, track2.name and bulba.cc. Monetization. Buyers, like the man arrested in Ohio, purchased the dumps using Liberty Reserve and quickly began exploiting them for fraudulent purchases, leading directly to the cash-out phase. The small, insignificant arrest in Ohio suddenly provided the Secret Service with a panoramic view of the kingpin's entire operation. They had the crime scene, the deli, the weapon Cameo malware, the victim, the card holders, and now the name of the distributor, confirming that Track2 was the single coordinating force behind this massive wave of financial crime. The elite citadel and the shadowy chat. The network of the cyber kingpin was not a single sprawling landscape, but a meticulously organized realm with defined social strata. It consisted of two primary domains. The Secret Service now turned their focus to understanding the structure of these twin empires, Track2.name and bulba.cc. Track2.name was the market's public face. It was the place where any prospective buyer could register, deposit Liberty Reserve funds, and purchase stolen data, primarily the magnetic stripe information, known as dumps. This site was characterized by its high volume, its constant influx of new customers, and the general clamor of an open market. It was the necessary point of entry for Roman Seleznev's business, the place where he made his initial massive profits by servicing the bulk demand for card dumps. But the true center of power, the exclusive retreat for the top tier of carders, was bulba.cc. Bulba.cc was not an open market. It was the elite, invitation-only citadel. Access to this site was highly restricted and required a formal invitation from a trusted member. To even be considered, a prospective member had to prove their long-standing reputation in the shadow markets and then pay a hefty $1,000 fee. This fee was not a cost of doing business. It was a security deposit, a commitment to the site's exclusivity, and a deterrent against law enforcement infiltration. This walled-off digital fortress was where Roman Seleznev, under the alias Track2, offered his absolute best, highest quality product to his most trusted, wealthy buyers. With the undeniable evidence linking the Cameo malware in Idaho and the stolen cards in Ohio to these two sites, the investigators knew they had to find a way inside. The most direct route, however, was not through hacking, but through deception. The Secret Service agents immersed themselves in the communication channels used by the criminal underground, particularly Internet Chat Quick, or ICQ. ICQ was a popular instant messaging service, and it was the preferred method of communication for the criminal element due to its relative simplicity and perceived anonymity. It was through this platform that the agents operating undercover began to engage in ICQ chat logs with Track2. The goal was simple: gather intelligence, confirm identity, and most importantly, obtain the necessary jurisdictional evidence to secure a search warrant. The detectives' chat interactions to gather intelligence were delicate, high-stakes conversations. The agent had to adopt the persona of a savvy, demanding buyer, fluent in the slang and economics of the carding world. The chats were not long or conversational. They were purely transactional. The agent would inquire about the volume of dumps, the price structure, the card types available, and the guarantee of the data's quality. Through these guarded exchanges, the agents gathered critical intelligence. Track2 was extremely careful, never revealing personal information. He consistently steered the conversation back to the mechanics of the transaction, emphasizing the anonymity requirements and demanding payment be made exclusively in Liberty Reserve. This insistence on the ghost money was the ultimate requirement for anonymity, a firewall against traditional banking records. However, every message Track2 sent, every demand he made, provided more confirmation of his identity and his control over the two websites. The chats became a running digital interrogation, slowly chipping away at the anonymity Roman Seleznev had carefully constructed. While the chat logs built the criminal profile, the legal foundation for the investigation moved at a much slower, more deliberate pace. The Secret Service needed to execute a crucial maneuver, obtaining the Yahoo email warrants for the website's Whois data. The Whois system is the global public directory that lists the owner and administrator of every registered domain name. Criminals almost never use their real name to register a website. Instead, they use proxy services or simply enter fake information. However, the contact email used during the initial registration process is often a recurring point of failure for cybercriminals. The Secret Service, armed with the mounting evidence from Schlotsky's case and the ICQ chat logs, successfully obtained the necessary warrants. This was not a fast process. The legal system, governed by the Fourth Amendment and the requirements for probable cause, moves with glacial speed compared to the instant communication of the hackers, stressing the slow, deliberate pace of the legal system versus the speed of the hackers. The agents had to demonstrate beyond any doubt that the emails linked to the website registrations were actively being used for criminal enterprise. The wait for the warrant execution and the subsequent data return from the email provider was tense. The agents knew that while they were waiting for the legal system to deliver, Track 2 was actively selling thousands of new dumps every day, compounding the financial damage. The entire investigation rested on the hope that Roman Seleznev had made a single, careless mistake when registering his two primary websites. Finally, the information from the Yahoo warrant was delivered. This data dump contained the registration details for both track2.name and bulba.cc. It was the key they had been waiting for, the legal means to leap from the abstract digital persona to the tangible, physical identity. The rot at the Broadway Grill, escalation, the quiet, calculated legal work that had consumed the Secret Service Cyber Task Force for months was suddenly shattered. The urgency of a new, massive breach yanked the Kingpin's abstract digital operations back into stark, human focus. The alarm bell was a frantic call from BECU, Boeing Employees Credit Union, reporting a tsunami of fraudulent charges, all traceable to a single affluent location, the Broadway Grill in Seattle. Located in the heart of the Capitol Hill neighborhood, a bustling, tech-savvy, and outwardly secure enclave, the restaurant's unexpected vulnerability was all the more alarming. The very notion that a high-profile establishment in a major American city could be compromised so thoroughly suggested the criminal was growing bolder, the reach of his digital rot extending further into the national infrastructure. The pattern of concentrated fraud originating from a single point of compromise was now a grimly familiar signature, the chilling digital calling card of Track 2. Special Agent John Wells, the lead investigator, didn't need to consult a playbook. The response was instantaneous. Secret Service agents, working in lockstep with forensic specialists from the Electronic Crimes Task Force, quickly mobilized. Within hours, a sterile, quiet perimeter was established around the Broadway Grill's back office, where the point-of-sale POS system resided, the unassuming hub of the burgeoning disaster. The digital autopsy. The ensuing forensic investigation revealed a scene eerily similar to the initial Schlotsky's deli intrusion in Idaho, yet simultaneously more chilling and dramatically more advanced. As the forensic team, led by a specialist named Agent Chen, meticulously imaged and analyzed the restaurant server, they discovered a slightly different, more refined version of the notorious Cameo malware. It's not a simple copy of the Idaho strain, John, Agent Chen noted, his voice hushed with a mixture of professional awe and apprehension. This is a generational leap. The file size is smaller, the encryption layers are thicker, and the command and control communication protocol is completely obfuscated. It suggests the criminal is not just reusing code. They are actively developing and improving their tools. The new malware was a spectral parasite, better at obscuring its presence from standard antivirus sweeps and alarmingly more efficient at its primary task, data harvesting. Like its predecessor, this sophisticated piece of software was a digital skimmer. It lay dormant, hidden deep within the system memory, waiting for the precise millisecond a customer's magnetic stripe information, the critical Track 1 and Track 2 data, passed through the register for authorization. Once captured, it didn't immediately exfiltrate the data. Instead, it behaved like a meticulous accountant of fraud, compiling the stolen data into a single, massive, designated file, hidden deep within an innocuous-looking system directory. The sheer volume of data discovered on the Broadway Grill server was staggering. It led to the shocking finding of 33,000 credit card records in a single, perfectly organized and horrifyingly easy to read, clear text file. It was the unmistakable output of an industrial-scale harvesting operation. 33,000 credit card dumps, each one a complete key to a person's financial life, compiled in one spot. The scale was no longer a crime of opportunity. It was a systemic act of financial terrorism. The velocity of theft, the speed of the kingpin's monetization operation, proved perhaps the most alarming detail. The fraudulent charges reported by Becue and other financial institutions were not occurring weeks or even months after the data theft, a typical lag time for organized carding rings. They were appearing within a day or two of the compromise. This emphasized the brutal efficiency and high velocity of the card sales and the subsequent cash-out operations. The stolen data was siphoned out of the restaurant's network and immediately uploaded to the kingpin's bespoke dark web marketplaces, Track2.name and Bulba.cc. Buyers operating from Eastern Europe and Russia would purchase the fresh dumps with cryptocurrencies like Liberty Reserve, the preferred digital currency of the time for anonymity, and instantly use them to encode counterfeit cards for cash-out operations at ATMs and big-box retailers globally. The time from compromise to cash-out was less than 48 hours, the definitive signature. The Secret Service could now overlay the Broadway Grill case with Schlotsky's case, seeing the identical, chilling pattern of intrusion, harvesting, and rapid monetization. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. It was a multiplying body of undeniable fact. Two geographically distant victims, a small-town Idaho deli and a high-end Seattle restaurant. Two slightly different strains of the Cameo malware, confirming active, continuous development of the attack software. Two instances of mass data, exfiltration, both targeting an external Russian server, a digital Dropbox for the kingpin. The identical outcome, rapid sale on the Track 2 websites, fueling a global fraud apparatus. The pattern was a definitive and unique signature. This new case provided the investigators with the final, compelling evidence they needed to move to the next stage of the prosecution. The trail was unbroken. From the financial institution, the fraudulent charges, to the point of compromise, the Broadway Grill, and back to the digital distributor and developer, Track 2. They had the motive, the meticulously documented method, and the undeniable means. The waiting game. While Agent Chen's forensic team meticulously documented the staggering extent of the theft in Seattle, the slow, deliberate legal wheels continued to turn back in Washington, D.C. The investigators were still awaiting the single most critical piece of evidence: the response to the Yahoo email warrant. That warrant, painstakingly negotiated and submitted, was the one and only piece of paper that would definitively connect the digital alias, the kingpin who called himself Track 2, to a physical person in the real world. The rot at the Broadway Grill, the brazen, high-volume theft of 33,000 card details, served as the loud, final alarm. The kingpin's operations were not just continuing, they were escalating. The financial damage was becoming too significant, too widespread, and too fast-moving to ignore any longer. Wells looked at the image of the clear text file on Chen's screen. 33,000 lives reduced to lines of magnetic stripe data, and felt a profound sense of closure. The case was ready. The final, critical piece of evidence was about to arrive. A small, legally mandated digital package that would finally unmask the ghost. The ghost's true name, Roman Seleznev. The investigation into the cyber kingpin had been a years-long, grueling accumulation of abstract digital evidence. Every meticulously collected packet, every encrypted chat log, and every stolen credit card dump had pointed toward a phantom, the alias Track 2. The entire edifice of the case, representing millions in losses and countless hours of specialized detective work, hinged on one final, tangible piece of paper. That pivotal moment arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet, authoritative thud of a legal file landing on the desk of Special Agent John Wells. The Yahoo email warrant, painstakingly requested, legally compelled, and finally delivered, contained the crucial contact information used by the person who had registered the notorious domain names track2.name and bulba.cc. The pivot point, the PayPal connection. The Secret Service agents gathered around the terminal. The tension was palpable. Years of chasing a shadow were about to culminate. Agent Wells opened the attached file, and the answer they had chased across continents and through the darkest corners of the internet was laid bare in a single, quiet moment. The email address provided during the registration process for the criminal marketplaces mentioned a specific financial account, a PayPal account belonging to Roman Seleznev. The sheer weight of the reveal was immense. The seemingly random, abstract names of the dark web: Encux, the early psycho vendor; Track 2, the untouchable kingpin; Bulba, the elite citadel, all collapsed instantly and definitively into the name of a single, physical person. This moment was the emotional peak of the investigation, a quiet, profound satisfaction of realizing that every suspicion, every painfully connected digital thread had been correct. The Russian living in Vladivostok was the coordinating, developing, and monetizing force behind the global theft of millions of credit card dumps. The discovery immediately triggered a comprehensive internal cross-referencing process. The agents worked late into the night, emphasizing the profound emotional and professional weight of connecting the four core identities: Encux, Track 2, Bulba, and the physical person Roman Seleznev, into a single, unified criminal entity. The evidence was overwhelming, forming a definitive digital fingerprint: name, address, and ICQ, The email address provided during the registration was directly linked to a confirmed PayPal account. Furthermore, the physical address in Vladivostok and the specific ICQ number used by the person posing as Track 2 were found to be associated with earlier accounts registered by Roman Seleznev. The scattered pieces of physical identification were now a coherent picture. Web money accounts and financial traces. The financial trails leading out to the compromised systems showed consistent overlap. The Web Money and Liberty Reserve accounts used by both the original NC Yuks persona and the later, more sophisticated Track 2 persona were interconnected. Crucially, the deposits that initially seeded these criminal accounts were traceable back to bank accounts held in Roman Seleznev's legal name. The evidence was conclusive. A seamless timeline showing the evolution of the criminal, from an amateur identity thief selling small batches to a dominant distributor on Carter's market, and finally to the sophisticated proprietor of his own exclusive industrialized marketplaces. The Secret Service now had all the components necessary for a formal public indictment that would hold up in a US court. The chilling confirmation, the FSB leak. But the name reveal accomplished something even more crucial. It confirmed a chilling theory that had troubled the agents since the very beginning of the investigation. The theory that Roman had been tipped off by elements within the Russian Federal Security Service, FSB. Recall that in 2009, immediately following the Secret Service's frustrating and largely unhelpful meeting with the FSB in Moscow, the vendor N-Kux had gone completely dark. He vanished from the carding forums without a trace. Roman Seleznev had not just stopped posting, he had systematically erased his public digital presence. This sudden and total operational shutdown had always suggested he had been warned. The new evidence proved the agent's theory correct. The timeline of the identity change and the geographical ping of the initial login attempts immediately after the Moscow meeting were too coincidental. Someone within the Russian security apparatus had revealed that the United States Secret Service was actively pursuing the user NC Chugs and had pinpointed his general location in Vladivostok. This confirmed leak explained everything about the subsequent actions of the cyber kingpin. The rebranding, his need to immediately drop the compromised NC Yuks alias. The resurfacing, his resurfacing as the highly protected, cautious Track 2 persona, leveraging his existing network but operating with dramatically increased security protocols. The seclusion, the profound, almost paranoid caution in all his subsequent communications and domain registrations, forcing investigators to rely on warrants rather than simple digital surveillance. The quiet, powerful reveal of Roman Seleznev's name was the absolute pivot point of the entire investigation. It moved the case from a protracted, abstract digital pursuit of a phantom to a focused, real-world operation targeting a specific, named individual. The Secret Service was no longer building a profile based on code and commerce. They were building a federal indictment aimed at one man. The time for digital surveillance was over. The time for justice was beginning. The server of stolen dreams, 400,000 plus, armed with Roman Seleznev's confirmed true name and the legal authority it provided, the hunt immediately shifted from the digital ghost to his digital heart, the repository where he stored his stolen dreams and ran his empire. Through the intricate trail of email clues, financial transactions, and relentless Internet Protocol (IP) address tracking, the Secret Service analysts pinpointed the location of Roman's main repository. It was a rented virtual server housed in a massive, nondescript data center operated by a company named Hop One in the quiet suburbs of Virginia. The discovery instantly triggered the swift legal machinery of the United States Justice Department. A federal warrant was immediately sought and obtained to access the contents of the server. This was an operation requiring surgical precision. The goal was to secure the evidence without causing a disruption that might alert the kingpin, or worse, trigger a remote data destruction protocol. A silent execution. The agents and forensic specialists executed the warrant remotely. There was no physical raid, no storming of the data center. Instead, they coordinated a silent, non-disruptive copy of the virtual server data. This was a classic live forensics maneuver, a digital clone, an exact sector-by-sector replica of Roman Seleznev's entire working environment, captured in a snapshot of time. This clone contained all his files, his running programs, and the critical access logs. The actual server at Hop One continued to run, humming along in the chilled rack room, blissfully unaware it had just yielded all its secrets to federal agents thousands of miles away. The contents of that seized digital environment were profoundly shocking, even to the hardened investigators who had seen years of digital crime. The files revealed a scale of theft that made the 33,000 cards found at the Broadway Grill look like a trial run, the vault of victims. The primary repository directory, labeled simply dumps, contained well over 400,000 plus credit card dumps. To put that staggering number into perspective, each dump represented a stolen, active financial account. The combined estimated street value of the raw data on the carding forums, the price buyers would pay for this fresh data, was easily in the millions of dollars. The ultimate, true loss to financial institutions and consumers through fraudulent purchases and cash-out schemes would inevitably reach into the tens of millions of dollars. Roman Seleznev was not just the biggest vendor in the forums. He was definitively a global, industrial-scale criminal enterprise operating his entire infrastructure out of a quiet, rented virtual server in Virginia. Agent Wells leaned back, running a hand over his face. 400,000, he murmured. He was running an economy. The tools of the trade. Beyond the sheer volume of stolen data, the forensic team discovered the highly organized digital tools of his trade. The server contained a carefully organized suite of hacking utilities, custom-coded scripts, and detailed lists of target systems. This wasn't the work of a disorganized amateur. It was a well-maintained digital workshop. The suite of tools included custom brute forces, optimized programs designed to rapidly guess passwords for various network protocols, scanning bots, scripts coded to relentlessly scour large ranges of IP addresses for specific vulnerabilities, the Cameo suite, multiple evolving versions of the Cameo malware, including configuration files showing which specific PR systems they were optimized to target, obfuscation utilities, programs used to encrypt and hide communication channels and mask the source of his traffic. One of the key discoveries was the evidence of his mass scanning operation, which revealed his simple but brutally effective methodology. The vulnerability, exposed RDP. The server logs revealed Roman scripts were constantly and automatically mass scanning for open port 3389, remote desktop protocol. This port, a standard feature in Windows operating systems used by small businesses for remote administrative access, was Roman's primary gateway. His entire methodology was chillingly unsophisticated, yet brutally effective. He did not need to be a coding genius. He was a master of exploiting basic human error and fundamental security negligence. Exploitation. His automated tools would launch relentless brute force login attempts against every exposed remote desktop port they found. A surprisingly high percentage of small businesses use default or extremely weak administrative passwords. Reconnaissance. Once a weak password was cracked, he would meticulously search the compromised machine for evidence of POS software, the programs used to run cash registers and process credit cards. If no POS system was found, the machine was discarded. Infection. If a POS system was present, he would silently install the final payload, the latest strain of the Cameo malware, the digital skimmer they had already found at the Idaho Deli and the Seattle Grill. This allowed the theft to begin immediately. The forensic evidence painted a clear picture of a criminal enterprise. It was not defined by technical brilliance in zero-day exploits, but by sheer, relentless automation and an unshakable confidence in the lack of security awareness across the small business landscape. Roman Seleznev had simply built a digital fishing net, and the world's weakest security practices had filled his hold with 250,000 stolen financial identities. The global web of victims, unmasking the breadth of the breach. With Roman Seleznev's primary server, the digital heart of his operation, cloned and its massive, incriminating inventory of stolen data secured, the Secret Service transitioned into the critical new phase of their investigation. The cloned virtual server, henceforth referred to as the digital spy, became an invaluable tool that would not only illuminate the cyber kingpin's past movements, but also map the sheer scale of the trail of destruction he had left behind across the globe. The digital pen trap, a revelation of scale. The investigators, meticulous in their digital surveillance, installed a sophisticated monitoring tool, a pen trap, directly onto the cloned Hop1 server environment. This advanced tool was engineered to meticulously log the metadata of every single attempted communication with the server. The log files captured the Internet Protocol, IP, addresses, and specific port numbers used by Roman or his automated tools, documenting the server's constant, silent connections to a staggering array of victim machines. Almost instantly, the log files began to fill, not with sporadic activity, but with a relentless, constant stream of unique IP addresses and specific port numbers. This data deluge revealed a vast, interconnected network, a digital web whose complexity was chilling. Crucially, this network was composed not of co-conspirators and accomplices, but of the victim machines themselves. Every recorded IP address represented an exposed, compromised point of sale, POS, system, a cash register, a server, or a terminal, still actively connected to Roman's illicit hub, still silently uploading stolen credit card data with every customer transaction. The metadata painted an unequivocally clear and deeply concerning picture of the kingpin's targets. It emphasized the nature of the victims. Overwhelmingly, they were restaurants and small to medium-sized businesses. The sheer variety was telling. The smell of fresh bread and coffee at Grand Central Baking, the casual dining of Z Pizza and Cosa Mia, and the personalized service of Day's Jewelers were all represented in the logs. These were victims chosen not for their wealth or their importance on a corporate scale, but for their digital vulnerability, their outdated security protocols, and their limited IT resources. The data illustrated a predatory strategy of exploiting the weakest links in the financial ecosystem, the human toll, from IP address to storefront. To fully grasp the insidious reality of the crime, Detective Dunn's transition from the cold glow of the server room to the tangible reality of on-the-ground visits to local hacked businesses became absolutely critical. This was the pivot point where the cold, digital data of IPs and ports became intensely human. Dunn's visits across various states revealed a dishearteningly consistent pattern at every single location. The method was identical. The perpetrator had gained unauthorized remote desktop access and then implanted a custom, persistent malware installation into the POS systems. This malware acted as a sophisticated digital skimmer, harvesting magnetic strip data the moment a card was swiped. The most profound and often frustrating observation was the absolute lack of awareness among the business owners. These individuals focused on the day-to-day grind of managing payroll, serving customers, and balancing books, were often completely oblivious that their cash registers, the very terminals of their legitimate commerce, were under the sustained, unseen control of a Russian cybercriminal. They had no idea that for months, and in some cases for years, every customer who swiped a card was being digitally robbed, and that they, the honest, hard-working owners, were unwittingly hosting a massive, highly profitable criminal data farm right behind their own counter. The realization, when delivered by the Secret Service, was often a devastating blend of disbelief, anger, and profound violation. The kingpin's double life, luxury versus liability. As the investigation solidified the criminal evidence, it concurrently provided a chilling glimpse into Roman Seleznev's personal reality, the stark, almost unbelievable dichotomy of his double life. The evidence meticulously detailed the extent of this split existence. While his digital persona, Track 2, was laser-focused on optimizing his illicit trade, managing the flow of stolen credit card data, and running his American server, his physical life was a world away, concentrated on unapologetic luxury and familial comfort. Investigators pieced together his physical trail through disparate sources. Flight manifests tracked his movements. Financial records exposed his spending habits. And online social media profiles painted a picture of his family life. The records confirmed his Russian address, the existence of his wife and daughter, and, most critically, his strategic pattern of travel. Seleznev was acutely aware of his legal liability, evidenced by his frequent travel to countries without established extradition treaties with the United States. This careful, calculated evasion culminated in the high-profile purchase of a luxurious vacation home in Indonesia. The picture was one of stark, almost cynical contrast. A man who spent his days methodically and efficiently ruining the financial lives of hundreds of small American business owners was simultaneously living a life of extreme globe-trotting luxury, funded entirely by the streamlined efficiency of his criminal supply chain. His crimes were merely a means to an end, an opulent lifestyle free from the constraints of legitimate work and, seemingly, legal accountability. The airtight cage, ready for the takedown. The painstaking work had culminated in an undeniable success. The Secret Service now possessed all the necessary components for a successful prosecution: the confirmed identity of Roman Seleznev, the irrefutable data-driven evidence of his crime, the precise method of his attack, and the definitive map of the global scope of his victims. They had moved past the realm of suspicion and had effectively built an airtight case, complete with a massive data inventory, ready for immediate indictment. The challenge had fundamentally shifted. It was no longer about proving his guilt. The logs, the data, and the victims spoke for themselves. The challenge was now a purely logistical and legal one: finding a way to legally seize a man who had meticulously constructed his life around his acute awareness of international legal protections and the geographic safety provided by his non-extradition havens. The waiting game, a necessary period of surveillance and strategic planning, was in full effect. But in the volatile, high-stakes world of international cybercrime, a period of calm is rarely guaranteed. The well-laid plans of the Secret Service were about to be abruptly interrupted by a chaotic and entirely unexpected twist of fate: the shattered luxury in Marrakesh. By March 2011, the Secret Service had built an airtight case against Roman Seleznev. The evidence was secured, the digital breadcrumbs traced, and the indictment was formally handed down. Yet, Roman, safe in the vastness of Russia, remained utterly untouchable, confident in the imposing legal and political barriers that separated him from American justice. He was living a life of shattered luxury, enjoying the immense wealth generated by his colossal digital theft. And it was on one such opulent holiday that fate intervened with a shocking, chaotic violence entirely disconnected from his calculated crimes, a scene of calculated indulgence. Our scene is set not in the cold, windowless rooms where Secret Service agents monitored his digital empire, but in the sun-drenched, exotic beauty of Marrakesh, Morocco. Roman had traveled there for an extravagant vacation, a man accustomed to spending his illicit fortune freely, believing every transaction was a thumbed nose at the law. On the 28th of April, 2011, he found himself at the Argana Cafe, strategically located on the edge of the bustling Gemar Elfnar Square. The atmosphere was one of leisurely contentment. The air, thick with the scent of mint tea, spices, and exhaust fumes, felt lazy and warm. Roman had secured a table on the panoramic terrace, the kind of privileged vantage point that mirrored his status in the criminal underworld. From this height, he could gaze down on the swirling tapestry of life below: the snake charmers, the storytellers, the motorbikes weaving through the crowds. He was a picture of invincible luxury: expensive sunglasses, a light linen shirt, and the latest generation smartphone resting beside a tall glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. He felt insulated by his money, by the geography, and by the sheer sophistication of his operation. The cafe was a bubble of international tourism, the perfect setting for a man who believed himself to be above the law, protected by distance and diplomacy. He was reviewing his market metrics on the stolen card forums, a glass of water beaded with condensation in his hand, momentarily preoccupied with the financial machinery of his deceit. The intersection of chaos. At exactly 11:54 a.m., that sense of invincible luxury was instantly and brutally shattered. There was no warning, no build-up, just a sudden, deafening explosion that ripped through the Argana Cafe. The sound was not a simple crack or boom. It was a physical, concussive wave that seemed to momentarily steal the air from the lungs, immediately followed by the sickening, percussive sound of glass shattering into a million pieces. The air instantly filled with acrid smoke, dust, and the horrifying wet sounds of chaos. The attack, later confirmed to be an act of terrorism perpetrated by a suicide bomber, was random, indiscriminate, and devastating. It was an incident of pure chaotic chance intersecting with Roman's cold, calculated criminal life. For months, the American government had been trying to get a legal hold on him. Instead, fate, in the form of an anonymous explosive device, had reached across continents and struck him down. Focusing on the immediate aftermath, the cyber kingpin became just another victim. The comfortable terrace was transformed into a field of debris, splintered wood, and blood. Roman Seleznev was severely injured in the blast, not by the primary explosion, but by shrapnel, jagged fragments of metal and stone that tore into his body. The sudden, agonizing pain was a brutal counterpoint to the easy life he had been leading. His luxury vacation instantly transformed into a desperate, visceral fight for survival. The 9-month silence. The sheer scale of the injuries demanded immediate, drastic action. Following his immediate stabilization by local emergency services, Roman was urgently medevaced out of Morocco and back to the secure, if less opulent, confines of Russia. The severity of his wounds required months of intensive medical care, multiple surgeries, and a long, difficult recovery that demanded all of his attention. The most immediate and critical consequence of this catastrophic event was the 9-month shutdown of his carding websites. The twin engines of his empire, Track2.name and Bulba.cc, went silent. The streams of stolen credit card dumps, the constant flow of illicit transactions simply stopped. The kingpin was temporarily out of commission, his criminal enterprise stalled not by a search warrant or an arrest, but by the sheer, unavoidable physical necessity of his recovery. This unexpected event was a stark lesson in the randomness of fate, contrasting with the meticulous control of his calculated crimes. The digital world he mastered had no defenses against the random violence of the physical world. As Roman slowly recovered in the secure confines of a Russian hospital, the Secret Service continued to monitor his communications, waiting for a single sign of his return to activity. They were patient. They knew he wouldn't stay away forever. The resumption and the prediction. The 9-month hiatus ended eventually. As his health returned and the lure of easy digital wealth proved too strong to resist, the websites flickered back to life. The flow of stolen data and the illicit currency resumed, a grim testament to the fact that even near-death experiences could not ultimately deter his criminal ambition. But Roman had changed. He had learned a profound, painful lesson in vulnerability, yet he continued to rely on the political shield of Russian non-extradition. The agents, led by those who had built the initial case, correctly predicted his future movements. They had a crucial new piece of intelligence. Roman Seleznev, for all his trauma, was a creature of habit. The Argana Cafe had not stopped his need for luxury, only his willingness to travel to North Africa. The Secret Service agents knew his signature travel habits and were prepared for the long, quiet wait for him to make his final, fatal mistake. The Kingpin had gone dark, only to re-emerge, marking his inevitable next move as the key to his capture. The final net in the Maldives. After the terrifying and chaotic interruption of the Marrakesh bombing, a violent episode that underscored the deadly seriousness and global reach of their target, the Secret Service settled into a patient, grinding game of cat and mouse. Roman's network was global, but his physical presence was caged by geography and geopolitics. The agents, led by a small, dedicated task force, understood they could not defeat him with technology or legal warrants alone. They needed to wait for the criminal to make a geographical mistake. The focus was a constant, microscopic surveillance of Roman's inevitable trips outside the protective umbrella of Russian non-extradition. The cat and mouse game was detailed, agonizingly slow, and intensely strategic. Analysts meticulously tracked his digital breadcrumbs, last-minute, jittery flight purchases, the persistent avoidance of countries like South Korea, known for its robust cybercrime cooperation, and the temporary safe havens offered by nations with loose or non-existent extradition policies, such as Indonesia. The Secret Service exercised immense, almost Zen-like patience, knowing the vastness of the world would eventually run out of secure hiding spots. The rise of Tupac.cc, the Kingpin's return to full operational status, was not subtle. It was marked by the appearance of a new, highly sophisticated marketplace in 2012, the new site, Tupac.cc. This wasn't a clumsy forum or a hastily coded bulletin board. Tupac.cc was a significant leap in professionalism and technical skill, featuring an automated escrow system, customer service, and a technical infrastructure designed to repel law enforcement attacks. It was a clear signal that Roman was not deterred, but emboldened, now running a full-scale professional cyber enterprise. More critically, the Secret Service quickly connected this new, slick operation to some of the largest and most destructive data breaches of the modern era. The hundreds of thousands of payment card numbers flowing through Tupac.cc were linked directly to massive breaches at major American retailers, including the devastating, high-profile compromise of Neiman Marcus, and, most recently and catastrophically, the data heist that crippled the systems of Home Depot. Roman was no longer a petty thief. He was the primary fence for an international cartel of hackers responsible for billions of dollars in losses and untold damage to consumer trust. The case had transitioned from a high-priority fraud investigation into a matter of national financial security. Liberty Reserve, the unprecedented boost. Then, in May 2013, the investigation received an unexpected and unprecedented boost: the takedown of Liberty Reserve. The shadowy digital currency provider, often called the Bank of the Criminal Underground, was seized and dismantled by a multinational task force led by the United States. The operation was a seismic event in the dark web, freezing assets and shattering the financial anonymity that cybercriminals depended upon. Focusing on the wealth of transaction data it provided, the Secret Service immediately mined the recovered servers. What they found was a digital Rosetta Stone, a wealth of evidence that conclusively tied Roman's fragmented criminal history together. The detailed transaction logs revealed the seamless, chronological financial links. The old, low-level accounts on his first platform, NCUX, the subsequent, growing transfers to his Track 2 accounts, and finally, the massive anonymous transfers currently funding the infrastructure of 2pac.cc. The data proved that Roman's various monikers and accounts had facilitated over $15 million in transactions, conclusively linking him not just to the sites, but to the entire ecosystem of card theft. The collapse of Liberty Reserve was the functional equivalent of the entire criminal organization's bank records being handed over to the police, neatly itemized and time-stamped. It didn't just hurt his business, it removed Roman's financial shield and provided the final, necessary, airtight evidence to execute the indictment at the earliest possible opportunity. The surveillance game shifted from gathering evidence to waiting for a window. The Maldives, the geographical mistake. The opportunity finally arrived in July 2014. After weeks of tense, continuous monitoring, the Secret Service received the crucial, high-value tip-off. Roman was in the Maldives. The Maldives, an island nation of breathtakingly beautiful resorts and clear blue waters in the Indian Ocean, was a place Roman believed was another perfect sanctuary. Like Russia and Indonesia, it was a country without a formal extradition treaty with the United States. He was enjoying the sun, the anonymity, and what he believed was absolute legal safety. Recognizing the delicacy and immense strategic value of the situation, the absolute necessity of operating within a non-extradition country without causing a major international incident, the Secret Service began a quiet, high-stakes diplomatic effort. The agents didn't use warrants or threats. Instead, they presented the overwhelming, irrefutable evidence of Roman's global criminal enterprise. They laid out the financial destruction, the links to Home Depot and Neiman Marcus, and the proof that his operation was a threat to the international banking system. After reviewing the extensive, meticulously documented evidence, the Maldivian government made a crucial decision that prioritized international cooperation and financial security over legal bureaucracy. While they could not legally extradite him, they could and would expel him. Under the country's sovereign authority, the government deemed Roman an undesirable individual who posed a threat to their burgeoning financial reputation and stability. The final net was now closing around the cyber kingpin. The diplomatic ground had been secured, the political will achieved, and the Secret Service was already positioning their operational assets for the moment of capture. Agents were deploying under the guise of tourists. The logistics were being finalized, and the final stage was set for the dramatic, decisive confrontation on the tarmac that would end the longest-running cybercrime investigation in US history. The unmasking on the tarmac. The final days of Roman Seleznev's high-class vacation were a symphony of sun-drenched indulgence. For a man who lived in the digital shadows, the blinding clarity of the Maldivian sun seemed to serve as a defiant spotlight on his perceived invincibility. He moved freely among the luxury resorts, a silhouette against the vast turquoise waters, confident in his status as an untouchable digital lord. Every morning began with a swim in an infinity pool that melted into the Indian Ocean. Every evening ended with vintage champagne under a canopy of stars. He was a king in paradise, and this final, stunning backdrop was the perfect stage for his self-congratulatory finale. But unseen, unheard, and absolutely unrelenting, the Secret Service agents maintained their vigilance. The high-stakes surveillance in the Maldives was a masterclass in patience and precision. Working deep undercover, posing as high-end tourists or inconspicuous resort staff, they tracked his every movement. They documented the pattern of his indulgence, the casual arrogance with which he brandished his wealth, and the moments he was most preoccupied. The entire operation hinged on finding the single necessary window of opportunity where the risk to the operation and to the public was minimal. For days, they waited, the heat and humidity a constant physical drain against the electric tension of their focus. That moment arrived on a hot, clear day in July 2014 at the Malé International Airport. Roman's private jet was fueled and waiting. He stepped off the resort shuttle bus, the bright white of his linen shirt stark against the sun-baked stretch of asphalt that led to his waiting aircraft. He paused, adjusting his sunglasses, a final, languid breath of the salty air. This small, open space, the tarmac between the main terminal and his plane, was the stage for the cyber kingpin's final act of freedom. The moment Roman began to cross, the Secret Service's quick action began. From multiple points, a ground crew vehicle, the edge of a baggage cart, and the shadow of the terminal, 3 figures detached themselves from the scene. They were moving with a practiced, terrifying swiftness, their casual resort attire instantly forgotten in the focused aggression of their gait. Before Roman could even process the presence of non-airport personnel closing in, he was surrounded. A large hand clamped onto his shoulder, spinning him around, while another secured his arms behind his back. Roman Seleznev, a voice, calm and utterly authoritative, delivered the statement. "You are under arrest." Roman's immediate reaction was a visceral mix of confusion and disbelief. The tropical ease shattered, replaced by sheer, blinding panic. His face, moments before relaxed by the sun, contorted in a sneer of protest. "What is the meaning of this?" he spat, his Russian accent thickening with outrage. "You have no jurisdiction. I am a Russian citizen. There is no extradition treaty between the United States and the Maldives." He struggled against the grip, focusing on the confusion about the non-extradition treaty, believing his legal knowledge was his ultimate shield. The lead agent, his face impassive under the fierce sun, did not flinch. "Save your breath, Roman. The argument is moot." The words hung in the oppressive heat. The Secret Service was not operating under an extradition treaty. They were executing an expulsion order. In a testament to years of quiet diplomatic effort, the Maldivian government had quietly agreed to hand him over. The final, silent confirmation came in the form of 2 uniformed figures, Maldivian police officers, stationed a respectful distance away, their arms folded, their faces impassive. Their silent compliance was the key to the entire operation, an irrefutable symbol of the end of Roman's sanctuary. The struggle ceased. The shock of being utterly betrayed by his chosen haven was palpable. Roman Seleznev was firmly placed into the custody of the United States government. Immediately, the agents moved with clinical precision to secure the assets that mattered most. The immediate inventory of seized items was crucial. His pockets were emptied, yielding a collection of burner phones, his genuine and false identification documents, and, most critically, the black canvas bag slung over his shoulder. Inside was his lifeline, his weapon, and his ultimate confession, his Sony Vaio laptop. The agent handling the seizure treated the laptop with reverence and caution, afforded a ticking time bomb. It was immediately placed into a specialized anti-static and anti-forensic container. This was more than just a computer. It was Roman's working computer, the ultimate repository of his current crimes. The digital evidence needed to build an unbreakable case against the ghost of Vladivostok. The Secret Service team did not fly Roman directly to the continental United States. The flight path was designed to ensure maximum isolation and legal certainty. The initial leg of the journey was long, arduous, and deliberately circuitous. Roman was flown east, a captive aboard a government jet, towards the distant shores of Guam, a US territory. This choice was strategic, emphasizing his isolation and the certainty of his capture. Landing him on American soil ensured the ironclad jurisdiction of the federal courts and eliminated any possible future legal challenge regarding the location of his initial arrest and processing. The successful, non-violent apprehension of the cyber kingpin was a victory, years in the making. With the sun setting over the Indian Ocean, the ghost of Vladivostok had been lured out of his lair and placed firmly into the custody of the American judicial system, his flight path now charted not by his own whims, but by the determined hand of justice. The telltale password, the intellectual victory, the entire justification for the complex, high-risk rendition operation lay in the contents of the Sony Vaio laptop, seized on the Maldivian tarmac. This device was not just a computer. It was the digital heart of Roman Seleznev's current empire, the Rosetta Stone that promised a definitive conviction. Yet for days, the laptop remained a closed, black box, a monument to digital defiance, protected by a single, powerful line of defense: the full-disk encryption password. The tyranny of silence. The immediate challenge was immense. A heavy, almost physical pressure bearing down on the investigative team. The only person who held the key was Roman himself. He was immediately grilled, not for a confession, but for the one thing that mattered most: the password. "Cooperate now, Roman," the agents urged, detailing the potential mitigating factors his cooperation could provide. "Give us access to that machine, and we can discuss your future." Roman, however, remained an embodiment of arrogant defiance. A flicker of a smirk would cross his lips as he refused to cooperate, a silent taunt aimed at the collective might of the US government. His refusal left the investigators with the arduous, time-consuming, and by no means guaranteed task of brute force cracking the encryption. They knew the algorithm was strong, the processor fast. The estimated time to failure for a typical modern encryption scheme ran into the decades. The clock was ticking, not just on the evidence, but on the momentum of the case, a pattern of digital laziness. The forensic team, however, was not working without clues. Years of tracking Roman Seleznev, analyzing his digital habits across dozens of disposable identities, and reviewing his communication logs had built a comprehensive psychological and behavioral profile. They understood his criminal mind, but they also understood his human flaws. The team focused on a pattern they had noticed repeatedly in his various criminal and personal aliases, a fundamental laziness masked by technological sophistication. The Secret Service's forensic analysts, a unit of quiet, dedicated experts who could spend a week staring at a hex dump, zoomed in on a consistent username that had surfaced across several minor, seemingly unconnected forums, Smash One. The analysts theorized, based on industry-wide data, that even a sophisticated cybercriminal is still a creature of habit. They looked for the weakest link in his digital chain. Their meticulous work on his archived emails and old chat logs paid off. The username says one was traced to a forgotten, poorly secured movie ticket website in Russia, a relic of the early 2000s that had long since stopped patching its vulnerabilities. The moment of truth. The hope was a thin thread of psychological probability, that in a moment of convenience, of human fallibility, Roman had reused a password across a critical service and this inconsequential movie ticket site. It was a common, critical mistake, even among high-level operators, the digital equivalent of hiding a spare key under the doormat. Using a targeted SQL injection technique that bypassed the obsolete site security, the investigators recovered the credentials associated with the same one account. The investigators entered the recovered password into the Sony Vio's password prompt. The air in the makeshift forensic lab at the Secret Service headquarters was silent, thick with a palpable mix of anticipation and disbelief. Several senior agents, veterans of countless cases, leaned forward, their breath held. The powerful irony of the situation hung heavy. The fate of the cyber kingpin now hinged not on a quantum computing breakthrough, but on a password so trivial it was practically a joke. The password they entered, based on the recovered data, was a vulgar, childishly simple combination. It was Ochko 123, the Russian word for butthole, combined with a simple sequence of numbers. When the system accepted the input, the investigators' shock that it worked on the first try was not just relief. It was a profound, shared moment of vindication. The defiant digital fortress had fallen, not to a brilliant new exploit, but to the suspect's own crude, memorable digital fingerprint. The digital confession. With the laptop unlocked, the forensic team's analysis was immediate, overwhelming, and utterly damning. The data found was current, meticulously organized, an absolute proof of his enterprise. The first and most staggering discovery was the presence of $1.7 million credit card dumps, raw, plaintext records, organized by batch and date. This single laptop, Roman's chosen tool of the trade, held the raw data that would eventually be tied to the massive breaches of retail giants Home Depot and Neiman Marcus, among others. The sheer scale and organization were breathtaking. The laptop was, in effect, Roman Seleznev's written digital confession, compiled and curated by the criminal himself. The defense strikes back. When presented with this overwhelming evidence, the unlocked laptop, the $1.7 million stolen records, the malware development kits, the defense team did not collapse. They immediately mounted a highly technical and aggressive counter-argument: evidence tampering. Roman Seleznev's high-priced, specialized attorneys argued that the evidence must have been planted or manipulated by the Secret Service after the seizure in the Maldives. They cited subtle discrepancies in the file's last modified dates, suggesting a flurry of activity just after the laptop came into government custody. The accusation was a dangerous gambit designed to sow seeds of reasonable doubt about the integrity of the entire investigation. The defense argued with a chilling calmness that the government had cooked the books to secure a high-profile conviction. The ultimate counter. The Secret Service, anticipating this exact line of attack, was prepared. The forensic team countered the defense's argument with an advanced technique considered a gold standard in digital forensics: the use of the Volume Shadow Copy Service, VSS. VSS is a feature built into modern Windows operating systems that creates periodic, hidden snapshots of the system's hard drive for recovery purposes. These snapshots are typically inaccessible and tamper-proof to a casual user, but a forensic expert can leverage them. The investigators presented the court with these historical shadow copies. The copies provided irrefutable proof that the key incriminating files, the $1.7 million credit card dumps, the various strains of custom-built malware, and the communications logs existed on the laptop days, weeks, and even months before it was seized on the tarmac. Each shadow copy was a time-stamped photograph of the laptop's state, a digital echo that proved the files were organic to the machine. The sheer weight and technical elegance of the Volume Shadow Copy Service counter-proof silenced the defense. The telltale password, the immediate massive discovery of the $1.7 million cards, and the successful counter-argument using the Volume Shadow Copy Service ensured that the case against the cyber kingpin was now irrefutable, closing the door on any doubt and setting the stage for his conviction. The unraveling of the kingpin. The final act. With the Sony Vaio laptop unlocked and its terrifying contents meticulously secured, the drama of Roman Seleznev's capture shifted from the tropical sands of the Maldives to the imposing high-stakes theater of the American judicial system. The initial shock of his apprehension had barely faded when a new, more desperate phase began: the frantic calls and the political lifeline. As Roman Seleznev was being processed, fingerprinted, and detained in a sterile facility, far from the digital realm he controlled, a team of seasoned federal investigators was engaged in a parallel, critical operation, monitoring his telephone calls. The transcripts of these communications would become one of the most damning pieces of evidence, peeling back the layers of the criminal operation and exposing its powerful political underpinnings. The calls between Roman and his father, Valery Seleznev, a high-ranking deputy in the Russian State Duma, were not typical exchanges of comfort between a father and an imprisoned son. They were frantic, coded, and chillingly political. Roman, stripped of his digital armor and facing the cold reality of US federal charges, desperately sought the only lifeline he believed remained: his father's immense political influence. "You must talk to the right people. This is a mistake, a political kidnapping." Roman's voice, often arrogant in his digital exchanges, was now laced with raw panic. The conversations quickly escalated from cries for help to the detailing of an extraordinary, high-stakes plot. The transcripts contained explicit, overheard conversations detailing an attempt to arrange a massive $10 million bribe to secure Roman's freedom from American custody. This wasn't a typical defense strategy. It was an attempt to subvert the entire judicial process through sheer political and financial power. The exchanges were filled with cryptic miracle code words, veiled references to political favors, and detailed instructions on how the bribe money would be moved and delivered. The investigators, listening to every coded utterance, realized they were no longer just prosecuting a cybercriminal, but exposing a brazen plot involving international political corruption at the highest levels. This interception transformed the case from a standard cyber theft trial into a diplomatic and espionage flashpoint. The defense and the unwavering refusal, despite the undeniable evidence found on his laptop, the severity of the charges, 40 counts including wire fraud, hacking, and identity theft, and the potentially life-altering sentence, Roman Seleznev consistently refused to take a plea deal. His decision was rooted in a profound and ultimately fatal overestimation of his own leverage. He truly believed his father's political influence, coupled with the sophisticated technical and legal challenges his defense team was preparing to raise, would be sufficient to secure his acquittal, or at the very least, a favorable political exchange. He saw himself as a political pawn, not a common criminal. This unwavering refusal, fueled by arrogance and a misplaced sense of security, forced the case to proceed to a full, grueling trial, giving the prosecution the chance to parade the full human and financial cost of his empire before a jury. The legal battle, tampering and kidnapping. The trial was a complex, dramatic clash between digital evidence and bold legal maneuvers. The defense centered its strategy on two main, provocative arguments: tampering with evidence. They argued that the laptop's contents were tainted, suggesting investigators had improperly accessed or planted data, attempting to cast a shadow of doubt over the entire digital trail. Illegal arrest, kidnapping. Leveraging his father's status and the international nature of the capture. The defense argued Roman's apprehension in the Maldives was an illegal seizure, a kidnapping that violated international law and US due process, thereby invalidating all subsequent evidence. The prosecution, however, methodically dismantled both arguments. Expert witnesses meticulously demonstrated the forensic integrity of the evidence, detailing the chain of custody for the laptop data. On the constitutional challenge, the court ruled decisively that the seizure was a lawful and targeted law enforcement operation conducted with the cooperation of a sovereign partner. The story of the Broadway Grill, the small, family-run business whose ruin was traced directly to Roman's malware, became the emotional core of the prosecution's case, replacing abstract data theft with tangible human damage. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned their verdict. The sound of the foreperson reading the counts was a grim drumbeat of defeat. Roman Seleznev was found guilty on 38 of the 40 counts. The kingpin's digital empire had finally collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. The sentence and the domino effect. At the sentencing hearing, the judge did not mince words. He noted the industrial scale of the crime, which victimized thousands of businesses across the globe. The staggering number of victims, each one suffering fines, cleanup costs, and often closure, and Roman's complete lack of remorse throughout the proceedings. The judge delivered the shocking sentence: 27 years in a federal penitentiary. It was an extraordinary sentence, one of the longest ever handed down for a cybercrime conviction in the United States, sending an unequivocal message that digital destruction would be met with consequences commensurate with physical violence and fraud. But the legal ramifications of Roman's dark empire did not conclude with the Seattle conviction. In addition to the current charges, he was still wanted in other jurisdictions for his earlier massive crimes, specifically the ownership and operation of the infamous CARDA SU Black Market Forum and his direct involvement in the massive RBS WorldPay hack that had rattled the global banking system years prior. Detailing Roman's final pleas, facing overwhelming pressure and the certainty of endless future trials, he entered guilty pleas to resolve all outstanding charges in 2 other states. These additional, separate pleas resulted in the judge imposing further consecutive sentences. When the numbers were tallied, Roman Seleznev's final punishment was a combined total of 41 years in federal prison and $52 million in court-ordered restitution to his victims. The human cost. The fallout of Roman's operation was a clear, devastating testament to the human cost of his theft. The poignant closure of the Broadway Grill, the sheer volume of financial impact on countless small businesses, the fines, the cleanup costs, and the permanent loss of trust underscored that cybercrime is not victimless. The $52 million in restitution was a judicial acknowledgement of the massive debt he owed. The kingpin's tale finally concludes not on a luxurious beach, counting his ill-gotten gains, or in a shadowy digital bazaar, but with the somber, static image of Roman Seleznev in a high-security North Carolina prison, a man who built an empire on the digital ruins of small American businesses, who sought a political miracle to escape justice, and whose legacy became a cautionary tale of hubris in the digital age. The final fade. Reflections on the quiet hum. We now come to the quiet conclusion of the sleeper's tale, the story of the cyber kingpin. The narrative has followed the trail of digital breadcrumbs from the dimly lit bazaars of the early internet to the sterile finality of a prison cell. Take a deep, calming breath and allow your body to relax completely as we transition from the tension of the chase to the gentle rhythm of reflection, the geometry of anonymity. Our story began with a quiet hum, the atmospheric sound of the early digital underworld. It wasn't the roar of a physical marketplace, but the subtle, continuous current of data packets flowing across the globe, a ghost network overlaid upon the legitimate internet. In this shadow space, we saw the rise of the Carter's market and the chilling, almost geometric precision of the criminal economy it fostered. This wasn't chaos. It was a highly organized system built on scarcity, trust of a twisted kind, and the fungibility of stolen digital identity. The pure commodity. Credit card dumps. Think back to the core commodity, the credit card dumps. These were not plastic cards, but pure information, a sequence of numbers, the digital soul of a bank account, stripped of its physical shell and traded like a commodity. The dump wasn't just a number. It was a structured data packet, complete with track data, expiration dates, and verification codes, a ready-made key to a consumer's purchasing power. Its value was determined by its freshness and the country of origin, creating a supply and demand curve as cold and predictable as any legitimate market. The sheer scale was astronomical. Millions of identities exchanged in text files, creating a vast, liquid, and utterly untraceable exchange. The ghost currency, Liberty Reserve. Visualize the flow of money within this system, not in paper or metal, but in Liberty Reserve, LR, the ghost currency that powered the entire operation. LR was the perfect medium for this digital geometry, a truly anonymous, centralized digital currency that demanded no government-issued ID for account creation. It functioned as an offshore, cyber-age Swiss bank account, allowing the seller in Vladivostok to receive payment from the buyer in Ohio without a single dollar crossing a regulated bank wire. Every transaction was a line of code, an internal ledger entry on LR's servers in Costa Rica, making the entire economic cycle self-contained and invisible to traditional financial institutions. This seamless system, built entirely on layers of purposeful anonymity, created a unique and profound challenge for law enforcement. How do you catch a ghost that leaves no physical trace? The meticulous observation. The answer, as we learned, was not through digital aggression, but through meticulous observation. The agents of the Secret Service, tasked with protecting the US financial infrastructure, did not enter the digital world with a bang, but with a quiet, watchful presence. Their strategy was akin to astrophysics. They couldn't see the dark matter, the criminals themselves, but they could measure the gravitational pull, the patterns of their transactions, the frequency of their appearances, the specific language of their illicit advertisements. They studied the patterns of NCYUX, the psycho vendor. The alias itself hinted at the volatility and drive of the individual behind it. NCYUX didn't deal in small batches. He mastered the high-volume sale of stolen data, his reputation built on the constant availability of fresh dumps. The agents tracked his login times, his preferred forums, the unique cryptographic fingerprint of his communication style, slowly building a behavioral dossier where no physical one existed. His eventual disappearance, the chilling quietus following the unhelpful FSB meeting, a brief, unsettling silence in the data stream, only confirmed the investigators' instincts. Ghosts don't simply vanish, they relocate. Roman Seleznev, the man behind the alias, had merely shed his skin, reappearing with a new operational security posture and a hardened resolve as the protected vendor. Track 2. The complex digital geometry. Take a moment to truly appreciate the sheer complexity of this digital geometry. A seller in Vladivostok, a buyer in Ohio, a currency headquartered in Costa Rica, a forum server hosted potentially in the Netherlands, all connected by nothing more than encrypted chat and lines of code. This criminal supply chain was a masterpiece of globalization and distributed risk, far outpacing the speed and jurisdictional limits of terrestrial law. The vastness of the digital space provided Roman with an undeniable sense of untouchable power, an illusion of safety that was his greatest weakness. He believed the distance, the thousands of miles, and the layers of encryption equated to ultimate anonymity. But the agents understood that every action, no matter how obscured, leaves a trace, a digital echo. The geometry wasn't vast and empty. It was a precisely drawn latticework, and the investigators only needed to locate the key nexus points where the virtual world briefly intersected with the real. A login from a specific IP address, a forum post typo, a money transfer that had to eventually cash out into physical wealth. It was at these tiny terrestrial points that the ghost could be given form. Let the image of that complex network settle in your mind and feel your own worries and complexities smooth themselves out. The digital underworld, for all its complexity, operates on rules, and those rules, once understood, become the blueprint for its downfall. The digital breadcrumbs, from code to cur, Daleen, the most critical turning point in the relentless global chase for the anonymous digital kingpin, was not found in the shimmering lines of complex code, but at the stark intersection of the abstract digital world with the tangible reality of the everyday. Our narrative, a thread of electronic whispers and faint data trails, led us unexpectedly to the quiet lakeside town of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. It was a place of scenic calm, the perfect camouflage for the cold, insidious nature of the crime that had burrowed into its infrastructure. The destination, a Schlotsky's deli. The aroma of exposure. Imagine Detective Dunn quietly entering that space. The comforting, familiar aroma of freshly baked sourdough bread and seasoned deli meats, a scent of normalcy and lunch hour bustle, stood in stark, almost absurd contrast to the cold, clinical efficiency of the crime they were investigating. It was here, shielded by the mundane ritual of daily commerce, that they found the digital thief lurking inside the cash registers. The discovery was a piece of software named Cameo, a simple yet lethally efficient piece of point-of-sale POS malware. It wasn't a sprawling, complex virus. It was a slender, purpose-built parasite. Cameo performed its function silently, relentlessly, skimming credit and debit card data as transactions occurred. With each swipe of a customer's card, the magnetic stripe data, the full track 2 information, including the crucial card number, expiration date, and CVV, was siphoned off. Then, with an eerie, almost polite efficiency, the malware sent this trove of stolen information like a digital homing signal across the globe, straight to a Russian server. The entire elaborate network of cybercrime, the kingpin's sophisticated international operation, had reduced its entire existence to the smallest, most mundane point of weakness: an unpatched Windows PC running a simple cash register application. The failure was not a massive breach of a global financial institution. It was a failure of basic IT hygiene. The criminals exploited the unsophisticated vulnerabilities inherent in everyday business operations, turning a sandwich shop's checkout counter into a terminal for international fraud. The architecture of deception, Track 2 and Bulba. The investigation had long identified the perpetrators' twin digital empires built to maximize profit and minimize risk. The distinction between them underscored the kingpin's formidable business acumen, a mind capable of both mass market volume and premium exclusivity. Track 2.name. This was the open marketplace, the high-volume digital bazaar. It was designed for breadth, offering stolen card dumps to a wide array of cybercriminals, from small-time fraudsters to organized groups. The price point was lower, the vetting minimal, prioritizing a quick, high turnover of data. It was the wholesale division of the operation. Bulba.cc. In contrast, this was the elite citadel. Access to this private, high-tier forum required a steep, non-negotiable $1,000 fee for entry. Once inside, members were granted access to the highest quality, freshest card dumps, often organized geographically or by card type, and premium tools. It separated the serious, well-funded players from the rest, ensuring premium prices for premium, private transactions and an extra layer of operational security through exclusivity. Let your mind drift over the image of these hidden computer systems, the unencrypted data sitting in plain text files, the glaringly exposed remote desktop protocol, RDP, ports wide open to the internet. The sheer simplicity of the initial compromise was chilling. These errors, the digital equivalent of leaving a safe unlocked, were the foundation upon which this multi-million-dollar enterprise was built. It is a powerful lesson. Even the most complex, far-reaching crime can be brought down by simple, basic errors of configuration and protocol. The final link: Ohio, Seattle, and the supply chain. The pieces began to fall into place with the almost cinematic timing of a spy thriller. The arrest, thousands of miles away in Ohio, netted a critical member of the distribution network. The discovery of stolen, cloned cards in their possession was the physical proof needed to bridge the gap. More importantly, those cards were forensically traced back, not to a bank or a payment processor, but directly to the Schlotzsky's deli infection in Idaho. This confirmation cemented the entire supply chain of the crime, from the initial malware infection to the digital sale, and finally to the physical use of the compromised data. The full scale of the operation was realized with the final devastating piece of evidence. The investigation led to the Broadway Grill in Seattle, Washington. Here, investigators discovered a massive breach that produced a staggering 33,000 card dumps. This single location, compromised by the same type of unsophisticated POS attack, solidified the case against the kingpin, Roman Seleznev. The data provided a terrifying measure of his operations efficiency. Cards were compromised one day and used the next. The rot had not been confined to a single isolated incident in Idaho. It had spread to Washington, demonstrating the national scale and the velocity of the damage. The realization that even in the vastness and supposed anonymity of the internet, every action leaves a trace, brought a profound sense of order and quiet certainty to the investigators' minds. Seleznev was exposed, not by a brilliant counter-hack, but by the relentless, patient work of following the electronic breadcrumbs he was so careless in leaving behind. The unmasking and the inventory, a quiet triumph. The tension that had stretched across years, fraying nerves and clouding judgment, finally snapped when the Yahoo email warrant data arrived. It was not a thunderclap, but a sudden, almost silent release of pressure. After countless hours spent navigating a labyrinth of false flags, proxy servers, and transient aliases, the evidence coalesced, pointing with stunning clarity to one name: Roman Seleznev. That moment of unmasking was a quiet, profound triumph. The digital ghost that had haunted investigators, the legendary NCUX identity from the dark web's earlier days, was unequivocally linked to the current, more audacious Track 2 persona. It was the confirmation of every initial hunch, the validation of a grueling, years-long global pursuit. The elusive cyber kingpin was no longer a faceless legend. He was a concrete man with a life, a history, and a traceable digital footprint. The established theory of the FSB tip-off, which had protected Roman and explained his earlier, inexplicable vanishing act from a previous investigation, now became a central, chilling part of the narrative. It explained his arrogance. Roman felt safe, shielded not just by the vast geographic distance of the Russian Federation, but by his perceived political connections, a digital sovereignty he believed was unassailable. This sense of invulnerability had been his undoing, leading him to believe his operational security was flawless. The Virginia Vault, but the true, undeniable heart of the case, the unassailable body of evidence, lay not in the email, but in the physical world, the server housed innocuously at Hop 1 in Virginia. The Secret Service's operation to secure this evidence was a masterpiece of digital forensics. It was a surgical, non-disruptive, hot copy of the live virtual server, executed with such precision that the operator, Roman himself, remained blissfully unaware his entire empire had just been cloned. This digital haul provided the undeniable inventory of his crime. Within the server's drives lay the raw, irrefutable proof. Over 400,000 credit card dumps, meticulously organized, catalogued, and ready for sale on his exclusive carding forums. Each dump was a tiny transactional tragedy, bundled together into a mountain of fraud. The brutal simplicity of the method, analyzing the contents of the server, illuminated the surprisingly simple, yet brutally effective methodology that had yielded such a staggering criminal success. His technique wasn't based on zero-day exploits or state-of-the-art hacks. It was a tireless exercise in digital persistence. The process began with mass scanning for Open Port 3389, the default gateway for Microsoft's Remote Desktop Protocol, RDP. Once a potential victim was identified, the automated scripts began the relentless brute force login attempts. It was a digital siege of attrition. When the weak or default credentials inevitably failed, Roman's small team moved in quietly, deploying the custom-crafted Cameo malware deep into the networks of small to medium-sized businesses. Names like Grand Central Baking in the Pacific Northwest and Days Jewelers in New England weren't targeted for their size, but for their vulnerability. Close your eyes and let the image of the victims wash over you. They were small business owners, managers, and employees, utterly unaware that their cash registers, their point of sale, POS systems, were being remotely controlled. Their customers' data not just stored, but being silently and continuously siphoned off in vast, undetectable quantities. The sheer audacity of using a bakery's server or a jewelry store's network as an undetectable hub for global fraud was breathtaking. The ongoing pen trap, monitoring the server's external connections in real time, became the ultimate roadmap of the devastation. It revealed a global web of unassuming targets, hundreds of small businesses across the continent, all connected by invisible threads to the single, audacious operator sheltered thousands of miles away. The intervention of fate. The story, now moving towards its inevitable conclusion, took a sudden, surreal, and deeply ironic turn, a sharp reminder that even the most calculating criminal is ultimately subject to the randomness of fate. Roman, secure in his perceived invulnerability, had taken a luxury vacation to the opulent calm of Marrakesh, Morocco. The tranquility was shattered by a terrorist bombing that ripped through his locale. Roman was critically injured, a victim of violence entirely unrelated to his digital crimes. His subsequent emergency medical evacuation back to Russia paused the entire investigation, briefly silencing the kingpin's operations and leading to a temporary suspension of his illicit websites. This enforced dramatic hiatus was a strange gift to the investigators. It didn't derail their efforts, it solidified their resolve and, most importantly, sharpened their focus on his predictable patterns. The immediate rush to his home country confirmed his deep-seated reliance on non-extradition locales, highlighting his known weakness: his vacation home in Indonesia, a destination he was known to cycle through after periods of stress or high-level operation. His escape route was now their target. The final net: seizing the kingpin. The culmination of the years-long international manhunt was not a sudden raid, but a meticulous, patient tightening of the noose, a final phase that required as much diplomatic finesse as it did digital expertise. Roman, the elusive kingpin, had grown bolder, his confidence seemingly unshakable after years of successful evasion. His latest and most advanced digital citadel, Tupac.cc, was not merely a marketplace. It was a highly organized infrastructure designed to be the definitive staging ground for the world's most devastating data theft operations. The digital nexus, Tupac.cc. The sheer scale of the breaches linked back to Tupac.cc was staggering. When catastrophic data losses rocked behemoths like Home Depot and Neiman Marcus, investigators quickly traced the distribution and monetization pipelines back to Roman server architecture. This nexus confirmed, beyond any reasonable doubt, his transition from a prolific cybercriminal to the primary infrastructure provider for global digital organized crime. He wasn't just stealing data anymore. He was leasing the roads, the tools, and the digital fences. Every million stolen credit cards, every 100,000 compromised identities flowed through the machinery he had built. The pressure on the US Secret Service was immense. They were not just chasing a hacker. They were dismantling a global economic threat. Yet Roman remained elusive, shielded by layers of proxies, advanced encryption, and most effectively, by the murky, non-extradition legal environments of his chosen hideouts. The ghost money's collapse. Liberty Reserve. The year 2013 delivered the pivotal, seismic shift the Secret Service had desperately awaited: the global takedown of Liberty Reserve. This ghost money system, a digital currency explicitly designed to facilitate anonymity and illicit trade, had been Roman's financial shield, his untraceable vault. The collapse of Liberty Reserve was an intelligence goldmine. It provided the Secret Service with an unprecedented volume of internal records, millions of transaction logs, account histories, and wire transfers. Painstaking analysis of this data conclusively linked specific, high-value accounts, totaling over $15 million in illicit trade proceeds, directly to Roman's digital aliases and, crucially, to the infrastructure costs of his current operation. His financial shield, once impenetrable, had been pulverized into a ledger of irrefutable evidence. He could no longer claim to be a phantom. The money trail had materialized, heavy and damning. The opportunity, an island of no return. The surveillance intensified. The investigative team knew that capturing Roman on American soil or within the grasp of a US-friendly extradition treaty was a virtual impossibility. They needed a strategic advantage. That opportunity finally presented itself in July 2014. Intelligence confirmed that Roman, in a moment of hubris or perhaps simple complacency, was vacationing in the Maldives, an archipelago nation of stunning beauty, but also one lacking a formal extradition treaty with the United States. The Secret Service could not afford a lengthy legal battle. They needed speed, precision, and an end run around international law. What followed was a diplomatic masterstroke executed in the highest echelons of US government and Maldivian leadership. Instead of requesting extradition, the Secret Service, working through diplomatic channels, presented the unassailable evidence of Roman's global crimes, the sheer financial devastation, and convinced the Maldivian government that he represented a danger to the entire international financial system. They didn't request a legal surrender. They sought a state-level decision to expel him as an undesirable foreign national. The final scene. Tarmac in the tropics. The final scene remains etched in the memory of the agents involved. It was a tableau of stark contrasts. The blindingly stunning blue water of the Indian Ocean meeting the scorched, shimmering heat of the tarmac at the Male International Airport. The operation was executed with a sudden, devastating precision. Undercover agents, working in seamless concert with Maldivian authorities, moved in. Roman, likely expecting a carefree departure, was overwhelmed. His confusion was palpable. He immediately began citing his limited knowledge of international law, protesting vehemently and relying on the supposed sanctuary provided by the non-extradition treaty. But his words fell on deaf ears. Standing by the agents were members of the Maldivian police, silent, stoic, and completely assenting to the transfer of custody. The diplomatic masterstroke had worked. He wasn't being extradited. He was being expelled and immediately transferred to American custody upon leaving Maldivian soil. The most critical acquisition of the day was not the man himself, but the small, unassuming machine clutched nearby, his Sony Vaio laptop. It was his current working computer, the digital key to Tupac.cc, containing the full unencrypted record of his criminal empire. His protestations faded as he was escorted onto the waiting plane. What followed was a solitary, grueling journey across the vast expanse of the Pacific, destined for Guam, the nearest territory under American jurisdiction. As the plane lifted off from the tropical island, leaving behind the sun-drenched sanctuary he believed protected him, Roman Seleznev was no longer a ghost in the machine. He was a prisoner, the certainty of his capture sealed with every mile that brought him closer to American soil and the justice that awaited him. The confession and the conclusion. The last great barrier was the password on the laptop. Roman's arrogant defiance was broken not by torture or sophisticated decryption, but by his own lapse in security, the retrieval of his common username, Smouse1, and the successful use of the crude, ironically juvenile password, Ochko123, was the final, defining moment of the chase. The immediate discovery of 1.7 million credit card dumps was the ultimate confession. The technical defense of evidence tampering was expertly countered by the forensic team using the volume shadow copy service, providing historical, irrefutable proof that the damning evidence was on the laptop before the arrest. In the final courtroom act, the desperation of Roman's predicament was laid bare in the overheard phone calls with his father, Valery Seleznev, detailing the frantic $10 million bribe attempt and the search for a miracle. Roman's refusal of a plea deal and the aggressive defense arguments of tampering and illegal kidnapping were systematically rejected. The jury found him guilty on 38 of 40 counts. The judgment was swift and severe, a primary sentence of 27 years, followed by additional pleas for the Carder.su ownership and the RBS WorldPay hack, resulting in a total sentence of 41 years and $52 million in restitution. The scale of the punishment matched the industrial scale of the crime. The final, somber detail of our story is the collapse of the Broadway Grill, the innocent small business ruined by the costs of the cybercrime cleanup. The Kingpin's tale concludes not with a roar of victory, but with the tragic quiet of a closed restaurant sign and the cold solitude of a prison cell in North Carolina. Final rest. As we bring this long, detailed narrative to a close, take a moment to reflect on the quiet lesson embedded in Roman Seleznev's downfall, that no matter how complex the system of deception, no matter how powerful the illusion of anonymity, truth, and consequence, will always find a path. The quiet, patient pursuit of justice, often conducted in the shadows and across vast distances, will ultimately catch up to even the most elusive phantom. Let the rhythmic echoes of this story, the quiet hum of the server, the slow ticking of the legal clock, the patient surveillance, wash over you now. Feel your muscles relax, your breathing slow, and your mind settle into a deep, peaceful calm. The pursuit is over. The case is closed. The Kingpin is silent. There is nothing left to hold on to, nothing left to worry about. You are safe, you are secure, and you are ready for a deep and restorative sleep. Drift now into the deep silence of the night. If the sleeper's tale of the cyber kingpin has helped guide you toward rest, please consider supporting this sleep channel. Click the subscribe button to ensure you receive future long-form narratives designed to lull you into deep, restorative sleep. Share this episode with anyone you know who struggles to quiet their mind, and give it a like if you think a peaceful night's sleep is a gift worth sharing. Thank you for listening. May your dreams be deep and undisturbed. Good night.